can everyone hear me okay?
No.
No?
Oh my God.
Just kidding.
Hecklers right in front. Awesome. Folks at the back, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi. I do product design and product strategy here in Toronto at a company called Wrangle. We're a consultancy, so what we do is we help our clients design and build digital products. It is a real pleasure to be here today and speaking to all of you. And a big thank you to Ava from DevTO for inviting me to speak. So what's this talk all about? I'm going to be talking today about what I'm calling a different kind of DX or developer experience. So just a quick run through of what we'll be covering. I'm going to give a little bit of background on this talk and myself. I'm going to talk about what is DX, how do we usually think about it, and we'll talk a little bit about how I'm going to be looking at it this evening. We're going to talk a little bit about the ideas of building the right thing and building the thing right, what we're building and designing digital products. We're going to take a little bit of a look at some product design tools and techniques and thinking about these as a framework. So these are things that anyone can use. Please do try this at home. These aren't exclusive to designers. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use these tools and techniques even if there's no designer on your team. And also how you can get started doing this, what kind of projects you can use it on. So a little bit of what I'll be covering is really how we can improve the experience of working together on a product team. And that's a really big topic. We're really only going to have a chance to scratch the surface today. We're going to be looking at it from a very high level and really only through one lens. Like Shanta, this is my first time running through this particular talk. So please, I do invite you to give me feedback on it later on, and we can give it again and improve it. And also see if this is something that people are interested in hearing more about. Unlike Shanta, I was not wise enough to plant a support squad in the audience here. So please do be kind as well. Well, there you go. I have one Wrangler here with me today.
And you know, it starts there.
Okay, awesome. So you guys are on the team now, right?
We're in.
Awesome. Okay. Nice. So that's me a few years ago. As you can see, I was an early adopter of technology, although I don't think those headphones were really optimized for the toddler experience. I've worked with developers my entire career, all the way back to about 2003 when I started working full-time in tech. I love working with developers. Y'all are awesome. But I myself am not a developer. So when I was invited to speak to you here tonight, I knew I needed a little bit of help picking a topic. So I asked around a little bit at Wrangle and spoke to a few different developers, got some thoughts about what would you want to hear about if there's a designer standing in front of you talking at you for 20 minutes. So I've ended up running with a topic suggested by my friend and colleague and all-around brilliant dude, Sean May. He suggested that I talk about how the work that we do as product designers on a team can help make developers' lives easier and improve their experience of working on a team. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening. If you enjoyed this talk, I'm really happy to take all of the credit. If you don't, I think we can all agree that that's actually Sean's fault. He's there in the audience, please let us know afterwards. So before we go on, I'd like to talk a little bit about this concept of DX, or developer experience. It is in the title of my talk, so we should probably spend a little bit of time chatting about it. So what is DX? How do we usually think about it? Can you guys still hear me okay? The mic's working okay? So as you may or may not know, UX and product designers use a range of tools and techniques and processes to help end users succeed with and hopefully enjoy using the products that we design and build. In recent years, there's also been some more thought given to developers as end users of things like platforms, component libraries, dev tools, and on the importance of providing them with a good developer experience, thinking of them as end users of these things as well. This is a much larger topic, and there really isn't time to go into it in much detail this evening. There are some great articles out there, though, if you're interested in reading more and learning more about this. So here's my theory, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in thinking this, and that's that people want to do meaningful work. Work that matters, work that's valued and is necessary to the people who use the things that we design and build. If you don't care about this, that's cool too. It means that this talk probably isn't for you, and I really won't be offended if you choose instead to step out or just stare at your phone for the next 15 minutes or so. But back to what I was saying. As designers, if we broaden our scope and really apply and direct that same designer empathy to our teams and to our stakeholders who we work with, there's really also an opportunity for us to use these product design tools and techniques in a different way. So aside from my love of problem solving, this is my other main motivation as a designer, to help all of the people who I'm doing design work for to be successful at what they want to do and what they need to do. So I personally like to expand this goal to helping end users, teams, and organizations succeed. I really believe that the work that we do as designers can also help shape a different kind of DX. And that's the day-to-day experience of developers working on a full product team. In this case, what we can do as designers is to enable the developers on our team, folks like yourselves, to focus on building things that are high value and high priority for product success. After all, who really wants to spend months, or in some cases even years of their lives, working on something that no one is ever going to use? And actually, hands up if anyone's had that particular experience. All right, a few honest people in the audience. So one way that we as designers can do our part is by helping to ensure that as a team, we're building the right thing. The counterpart to this is obviously building the thing right. That is a big, big topic in and of itself. It can cover a number of different processes and methodologies, including things like Agile, Scrum, Lean, and many others. We also don't have time to get into those this evening. Instead, we're going to be talking a little bit about how we can get to the point where we know we're building the right thing. So here's a common situation on product teams that someone in Melissa Perry talks about in her excellent talk called The Build Trap. So what she says is what she often hears when she goes to work with the clients that she works with is that they have a problem. And their problem is that customers don't have custom dashboards. Can anyone guess what the solution that's usually proposed to this problem is? Exactly so, down in the front row. Solution? Custom dashboards. Perry goes on to say, rightly I believe, no, that's not a problem. But how many times have you seen this when you ask someone, what's the problem we're solving? And they say that the problem is that customers don't have the thing that I'm building. What she's describing is the phenomena of companies or product teams identifying pseudo problems. So this is essentially where we project our own solutions onto users instead of understanding what their real needs, goals, and pain points are, and building a solution that addresses those things. So it's really tempting to do this custom dashboard solution that she's talking about. Really, really tempting, because the solution seems easy, but it's a trap. This is a great way to spend a lot of time, again, we're talking months or years potentially, building something that no one wants, needs, or will ever even use. So as product designers, this is a trap that we can help our teams avoid. How do we do this? So much as we as designers might like to think that it's because we're special, magical unicorns, like our friend Lady Rainicorn here, that's sadly not the case. But I'll let you guys in on a secret. It's really because we're more like toddlers, in a way. let me explain. Does anyone out there in the audience have kids or has spent any amount of time babysitting a toddler? All right, a couple folks. What's one question that toddlers ask a lot?
Why?
Why? You guys got it. Yep, it's why. But as designers, we're not asking why just for the sake of it or to be annoying, although it might really seem that way at times. We do it for the same reason that you would run through something called the 5 whys exercise. Has anyone heard of this or had the opportunity to use it? Can you give us a little explanation of what that is?
So the 5 whys is you ask the simple why at the beginning, and then when you get an answer, you ask why on that, and you just keep on going until you run out of answers or patience
Or time, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's a really good. It's a really good explanation. So basically, the idea is you would run through this exercise called the 5 whys in order to really get at the root cause of a problem or the root reason why you're doing something. And the sort of it comes out of like basically like an anecdotal observation that having asked this question 5 times, you can get to the root of what that problem is that you're trying to solve. So I'm only going to go through 3 whys, but I'll give you a little bit of an example. We at Wrangle, again, we're a consultancy, we might have a client come to us and say, we want to build a customer self-service portal. We could just be like, that's great, we've got a team, we've got some ideas, we're going to build this thing for you. Instead, what we do through some of our kickoff and discovery processes is ask why. So we might ask them, well, why do you want to build a customer self-service portal? And they might say, well, it's because we want to reduce the number of calls to our call center by 50%. It's a good reason. We could just stop there. Instead, it's really worth keeping on going and asking why again. Why do you want to do this thing? Why do you want to reduce these calls? At this point, we might find out that there's a dollar value attached to those calls, right? It's expensive to maintain this thing. It could be worth hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to them to reduce the number of calls that they get. They might also have figured out through some research that they've done that by the time customers actually call customer support or technical support, they're not very happy. So what they believe, their assumption or their theory is that not only can they save money, sort of their objectives, but also that they can increase customer satisfaction by giving them the tools to kind of answer their own questions. We could keep going with this and keep on asking why, but basically you can stop when you feel like you've really come to, like, again, that root cause or kind of like a really important outcome that you want to see. So there's a gentleman named Ryder Carroll who wrote an article on the Envision blog, and I thought he put this quite well, talking about problems and how we approach them. And he says, viewed through another lens, problems can provide context, structure, and most valuably, new ways of thinking. But how do you shift your perspective when you're faced with a problem? And one way that you can do this is by asking why. So as I promised, I'm going to talk a little bit about some tools and techniques that we use as UX and product designers, and really to approach these again, as I mentioned before, as a framework. So something that can be applied by anyone in a bunch of different situations. You don't have to be a magical unicorn. So again, in the interest of time, I won't be able to go into these tools, techniques, and frameworks into too much detail. But this is really just to say, and this gets back to the idea of like, well, what do you do if you don't have a designer on your team? Really anyone with the motivation to do this and the opportunity to do this can run through these frameworks. And the nice thing is that these are things that people have been doing for many, many years, so there's lots of resources available out there, and lots of people who are really happy to help you out with these things. So some of these tools, techniques, and frameworks that you can apply to start asking and answering some of those why questions include things like design discovery processes, doing things like user journey mapping and story mapping, things like design sprints with your teams, contextual user interviews, which is really just a fancy way of saying figuring out who uses your product or who you think might use your product, and go and sit down with them in the context in which they would use it and learn a bit more about them and the things that they're trying to do. Things like competitive analyses, some usability testing. I could go on and the list goes on. I guess my point here is just that if you don't have someone in your team who's tasked with doing these things, these are really well-known frameworks, and there's lots of resources available online to help you get started with these things. And we use these for a particular reason. And again, this comes back to knowing more and learning more. And we want to do those things to make sure that, again, we're building something that has meaning. We're building something that people actually want to use and are going to get value out of, so that our teams can spend time building something that people actually want to use and will get value out of. So a few reasons why we might use these tools, techniques, and frameworks are to understand who our end users are, why they use our product or a specific feature or functionality, understanding what other products are out there that yours could be competing with, understanding what the value of this thing is to your organization. That can be really powerful, knowing the people who are maybe stakeholders or sponsors for this project, why is this meaningful to them? Is it meaningful to them? And in addition to why, and Melissa Perry talks about this more in her talk, and gives some really great examples of some other questions you can ask further down the road, another good question is when. So why is it important to build a certain thing at a certain time? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can get started with this, and I'll give you a hint, starting with point A there. I've been given a 5-minute signal, so I'm going to go quickly through one of these examples and talk a little bit more about another. So say you're on a product team, you're building something, you don't have a designer in your team. That's okay, you can still do some of these things and get a lot of value out of them. The kind of what I call the detective work scenario, I find tends to happen more on brand new products when you're really exploring why it is that you're going to build this thing. And what I call the archaeological dig, and I've done this myself, is when you're working on an existing product, or particularly a legacy product, especially when there's no one else around who remembers why you built a certain product or feature or custom dashboard. For the detective work scenario, there's a bunch of what I call sort of facilitated detective work techniques that you or someone else who you recruit as a buddy to help you out with can do. These are also things that there's lots about on the interwebs. If you're interested in learning more about them, I'm also happy to talk at length about them. So please feel free to ask me questions, either in person or over the Twitters. Some of these things are like the How Might We technique, things like backcasting, using something like Google Ventures Design Sprints, and I'm also going to give a bit of a plug for Wrangle's very own Clarity Canvas process. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the archaeological dig scenario and then wrap up. So I met a developer recently at a conference. She works for a large enterprise software company. We're going to need to change some names in order to protect the innocent. So let's call her Janet. Or the guilty, exactly, yeah. Well, I'll what is there? Innocent until proven guilty. So let's go with innocent. We're going to call her Janet, and let's say she works for Product Corp. Janet's department at Product Corp is on a tight budget, and there's no budget to have a designer on the team. So basically, Janet's been told, you're now also the designer. Oh, and by the way, we really need to improve the usability of this legacy product. So what Janet's on is she's on an archaeological dig. She's on this team. She doesn't know why the product is designed and developed the way it is. There's no one there who can give her this context. So she needs to do the work herself and figure out how she can make this better for the people who are going to be using it. I got a chance to chat with Janet for some time, and the good news is that she was doing pretty much everything right. And things that she wasn't doing were a little bit out of her control. So if you find yourself on an archaeological dig, so you've been told we need to improve the usability of this thing, no one knows why it is the way it is, you don't even know if anyone's using it or what the value of it is, there's some techniques that you can use in order to improve your own experience of working on this thing, to make sure that you're doing work that's going to have value down the road to someone who's going to use this product. And also to that person themselves. So some things you can do is to start small. Doing. So she was taking a little chunk of the product and the feature set at a time, and figuring out what are some things that we can do to make this better. So she was talking to customers, figuring out how and why they use it, making small changes in little batches, and then talking to small groups of people at a time to figure out, did this make it better? If not, what else do we need to change? So that covers a little bit about my second point as well. If you're on an archaeological dig, you don't want to dig everything up all at the same time. Focus on one area at a time. This also helps you ensure that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and keeping the things that do work there. Third point comes to asking those why questions. So be persistent if you find yourself in this situation. Keep on digging with your questions until you can understand the why. Why it was built, why those particular features are there in the particular way that they are, and whether anyone still gets value out of it, whether it's users or the company that you're working for. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind is understand and alert others to risks. So in Janet's case, one big risk was that she was basically being prevented from talking directly to the end users. She was talking to the customers, the people who are paying for the software. But there was a bit of a sort of a hierarchical political block between her and the actual people who are going to be using it. And I said, is there any way that you can actually sit down with these users and talk to them, figuring out what's, making this product have poor usability? She said it was basically next to impossible. So I said, well, what you really need to do is flag that as a risk. Make sure that people are aware of it and broadcast it. Last important tip, if you should find yourself being asked to also be the designer and you're on an archaeological dig, is to catalog and share your finding. So don't just take this on yourself, share it with the team, make sure everyone who you're working with understands what you found and what might be some next steps that you need to take as a team in order to make that product better. That takes me to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. And I think we should have some time for questions if anyone has any.
What are some techniques you prevent or you use to stop yourself from falling into the trap? Can you describe it to me?
That's a really good question. So the question's what are some techniques that I use as a designer to prevent myself from falling into that trap? It's a really, really easy trap to fall in because coming up with solutions and building stuff is fun. It's what we all like doing, right? So one good way to stop yourself from doing this is from coming up with solutions too early. There's a great saying, I'm not exactly sure who said it, I think it's fantastic, you've probably all heard it too, that you should fall in love with the problem and not with the solution. So I guess one way to stop yourself from falling into that trap is making sure that you've explored that problem well enough. And it's a little bit of a simplistic example, but still a good one. The one that Melissa Perry gives, about the custom dashboards. You haven't, the person who's giving that answer hasn't stopped to interrogate that problem and think a little bit more on it. So that's one really important way of not falling into that trap.
When you get to asking the question why, what happens, or how do you deal with the fact that some people just answer just because?
So I guess the question is, when you start asking why and someone says just because. You also need to pick your battles. So it can be a little bit different if you're working on a product team in-house, or if you're in a position like I'm in where we're working with clients. So sometimes you can keep on asking those questions and getting those answers and you uncover things that are really valuable. Sometimes you do get told just because. So it's important to pick your battles and know that sometimes by building trust with those people who you're doing this work for, you can have the opportunity to ask those questions again later on. So that's one thing that you can do. Another thing you can do is kind of go into stealth mode and start to look for the answers yourselves. So this is maybe covering like a little bit of a different example, but there's a gentleman called Andrew Smythe who teaches at Sheridan, and he has this great phrase that I like.
We just saw it too.
Oh, cool, yes. He has a great phrase that I really love called, fight bad ideas with good data. So that's a really great tool in sort of like your toolbox here, is to go out and say, like, we tried this thing and we put it in front of 10 users or 100 users or whatever it is, and actually it didn't work very well. So that can be a good way of, it's sort of like a supportive way too, right? Because you're finding a solution to a problem, fighting that just because.
And I guess go back to the last slide, in terms of documenting risks.
Yeah.
Maybe, in terms of, if the answer is just because don't ask any other questions.
Yeah, no, that can definitely be a big risk because you're just building out without having validated any assumptions or really understood the problem that you think you're solving. So absolutely, that's a big risk too.
Say the quote one more time. Like that design.
Fight bad ideas with good data. Yep. Any other questions? I'm also happy to chat a little bit more afterwards. Sean?
Do you get credit for this talk, or do I get blamed for this talk?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So, show of hands if I get credit for the talk. Okay, that's pretty good. Show of hands if Sean gets blamed for the talk. You're a Sean. You're a All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.